Sometimes playing MLB DFS forces you to get outside your comfort zone, and that is going to be the case for tonight. In this instance, it is going to be rostering bad offenses in good matchups and good situations for hitting. It is not fun, it is not comfortable, it is not reassuring, but I think for tonight, it may be necessary based on the stacking options we have at our disposal. We're going to break down which those bad teams are that we may want to stack, why that's the case, and how we can stack them without limiting ourselves and using players who don't bring a lot of upside to the table. Welcome on into the solo shot. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and numberFire.com. My name is Jim Sanas. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire, here to break down today's 7-game main slate with locks set for 7:07 p.m. Eastern for today. 2 extra minutes to destroy your lineups before lock for tonight. Only 2 weather notes across the slate. The first one is in Minneapolis for the Twins and Yankees. Only 45 degrees there at first pitch. The temperature, I would downgrade hitters there in a pretty big way. The total reflects that, so keep that in mind. But I do think the Twins may still be in play for stacking. We'll talk about that later on. The roof should be open in Arizona for Arizona and the Royals. It is 87 degrees there. That is the best spot for hitting on the slate by a pretty decent margin, so upgrade bats for the Royals and Arizona. What could possibly go wrong stacking those teams? I don't know, but we're going to do it. We'll talk about that later on. We'll dig into bad offenses on this slate, pitching options, which are much more palatable, and much more in just 1 second. But first, a reminder to make sure you're subscribed to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed, wherever you get your podcasts. We are back with the PGA podcast tomorrow, breaking down the Mexico Open with myself and Brandon Gadula. So make sure you check that out on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. And these solo shots also do go up on the FanDuel YouTube page as well. If you like what you hear, hit thumbs up over on YouTube or give us a 5-star rating over on Apple Podcasts. The NBA playoffs are here, and you can get in on the action right from first tip with FanDuel. Right now, all customers can get a no-sweat first bet or no-sweat same-game parlay every weekend when you bet the NBA playoffs. That's right. Just place a 3+ leg same-game parlay or same game parlay plus on any NBA playoff game. You'll get bonus bets back if you don't win. There's no better place to bet all the playoff action than America's #1 sportsbook. Head to the FanDuel app and get a no-sweat same-game parlay every weekend of the NBA playoffs. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. Must be 21 plus and present in select states. FanDuel is offering online sports wagering in Kansas under an agreement with Kansas Star Casino, LLC. Bonus issued as non-withdrawable bonus bets that expire 7 days after receipt. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit fanduel.com/RG. In Massachusetts, hope is here. GamblingHelplineMA.org or call 800-327-5050 for 24/7 support. In New York, 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY. In Arizona, 1-800-NEXT-STEP or text NEXT STEP to 53342. In Connecticut, 1-888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org/chat. In Indiana, 1-800-9-WITH-IT. In Wyoming and Kansas, 1-800-522-4700. Or in Kansas, ksgamblinghelp.com. Louisiana is 1-877-770-STOP. In Maryland, mdgamblinghelp.org. And in West Virginia, go to 1-800-GAMBLER.net. Pitching preview for this Monday main slate. Spencer Strider comes in with the highest salary on FanDuel. He comes in 11-2. We got Sonny Gray at 10-6. Brad Keller is a 92 with Jordan Montgomery at 9,000. Alex Cobb and Chris Bassett are the other 2 guys at $8,000 or higher. Now, this is not the deepest slate for pitching where we got some good guys, but it's not deep. And I think that lack of depth makes Spencer Strider the pretty clear top option here by a healthy amount. He's facing the Marlins, which is a good matchup for floor because just a 99 WRC plus against righties with a 33% fly ball rate. They don't strike out a ton, just 21% against righties. So that's why it's a high floor matchup and not typically a high ceiling one. But I think with Spencer Strider, every matchup is a high ceiling one. We're up to a 13 start sample on Strider throwing more sliders. And in that time, he has 9+ strikeouts in 10 out of 13 games, including 9 straight. He has hit 9 in all 4 games so far this year. And those weren't necessarily high strikeout matchups either. The Marlins don't have super drawn out plate appearances. They average 3.86 pitches per plate appearance on their current active roster since the start of last year, which is about average. And that's a spot where Strider does struggle. So it is nice to have that in that regard. I've got Strider projected for 8.9 strikeouts tonight. Nobody else is within 2 strikeouts of him. So he's probably the only guy on this slate who can get you 60 plus FanDuel points. Maybe Sonny Gray, but I do think Strider is the primary guy there. So to me, Spencer Strider deserves to be the obvious top option. It may be obvious, but sometimes it's obvious for a reason. So Spencer Strider to me is the number one guy here. Now, Sonny Gray is facing the Yankees, which is still a tough matchup, but it's less tough with no Giancarlo Stanton. It really hurts the depth within this lineup. And I think that gives us wiggle room to use Gray tonight. Gray is going with a new approach so far this year as a pitcher. He's throwing more sliders and fewer four-seam fastballs. And that has impacted negatively his batted ball data, where he's let up a 45% fly ball rate across 4 starts with a 40% hard hit rate. So that's a negative. But the strikeouts are very much there. He has a 28% strikeout rate. Gray's swinging strike rate is 12%, which is a career high. And his ERA is 0.82. Now that's not sustainable, but his expected ERA is very good as well at 3.25, and that does a good job of factoring in the amount of hard contact he is allowed. We saw Gray get 13 strikeouts in 1 start, so the upside is definitely there. It's good weather for pitching in Minneapolis. I've got Gray projected for 6.7 strikeouts, which ranks second behind just Strider. So it's not a super comfy spot. I can't call anything facing Aaron Judge comfy, but I think things align to make Gray a good play for today. So while Strider is definitively number 1, I've got Gray definitively number 2, and both guys I think stand out relative to the pack for tonight. As far as the value plays go, I think there are 2 legitimate options here, and I'm very open to both. We'll talk about both here today. One is Lance Lynn against the Jays. He is on the road, which is a difference maker for me, so we'll talk about him in things to watch. My favorite value play, though, is going to be Alex Cobb. Cobb is facing the Cardinals, which is always a tough spot. They are very good against righties and lefties. They're better against lefties, but very good against righties, and they don't strike out very much. But Cobb has looked really good so far this year. Similar to Gray, new approach so far. He's got a slider now, and it's working very well. He uses that pitch primarily against righties, and the Cardinals, if you want to neutralize Nolan Arenado, Paul Goldschmidt, you need a pitch to get them out, and it does seem like Cobb has that now. In his 4 starts, he has a 26% strikeout rate with a 2.91 skill interactive ERA. Like Gray, he's letting up hard contact, but most of that hard contact is on the ground. Cobb has a 59% ground ball rate so far this year. Now, the one big downside with Cobb is he does sometimes get yanked early, but he went 97 pitches in one game and he went 92 in another. So he can go long when he's pitching well, and I feel at least decent about him. There is some risk with the length, and that's not a risk that Lance Lynn carries, so I could see going towards him instead. But I like Cobb. I like the home park. I like the salary at 86, so I won't fight you if you want to go Lynn, but I would give the slight edge to Cobb personally and make him my number 2 pitcher of the night. So to me, the rankings are Strider 1, Gray 2, and then I would go with Alex Cobb. Took me a second there to find in the notes. Alex Cobb, number 3. Lance Lynn, number 4. After accounting for salary, I think all those guys are good options for tonight. Again, we'll talk more about Lynn later on. Let's dig into the stacks, and we'll talk about the bad ones in a second, but at least we can begin things with an offense we are comfortable with, one we like, one we have stacked quite a bit so far this year, and that's the Angels. The Angels, I think, are in a good spot once again today, and a team that we want to stack once again. They're facing Ken Waldichuk, who has had a rough start so far this year. His ERA is 7.65 across 4 starts. His expected ERA is 5.74. Not many strikeouts, too many walks, and that leads to a lot of base runners. Now, the batted ball data for Waldichuk is not terrible, but it's also not good enough to negate the issues he has had elsewhere. Waldichuk did have a good outing last week, but the Angels tagged him for 3 home runs and 6 earned in his first start this year. The Rays hit 4 home runs against him. So now we get the Angels here facing him for a second time. They've already seen him, and they hit him really well. I would not be shocked if they do that once again. So I want to be high on the Angels here once again. I think they're a great staff. Lefties, we can feel good about them. They've got depth in this lineup, even with Logan O'Hoppe being out, but I think that they are a good option here today. Now, part of that depth is Taylor Ward, and Ward has really struggled, been underwhelming so far this year. That's why his salary is very reasonable at $2,900. The barrel rate for Ward is roughly half of what it was last year. The hard hit rate is still decent, and it's the same with the fly ball rate, but he's not hitting his ceiling here recently. But in the past week, Ward does have a couple barrels, so he may turn it around. The peripherals here are not elite, which is why I'm not leaping to use him, but the situation is good for tonight. So I do like Ward at 29. I would probably not be there if you were like 35 or so. But for 29, in a good stack that I want to use with the platoon advantage, I know Ward hasn't been the best against lefties, but I still think that the number should be there. So Taylor Ward, to me, viable as a value at 29 to help get you to Mike Trout, et cetera, et cetera. As mentioned before, the best weather on the slate is Arizona for the Royals and Diamondbacks. And neither offense is great, but we want to value weather. We want to get that in there. And I think it's going to force us to stack Kansas City. Now, that's not fun because they've been awful so far this year, but I do think there is enough here to make us feel good about it, and there are ways we can circumvent it, which we'll talk about in a second. The Royals are facing Tommy Henry, who is taking Madison Bumgarner's spot in the rotation, and Henry was not lighting it up in AAA to bang on the door for this promotion. Down there, he had a 4.97 xFIP. He had a 6.33 ERA, which is similar to what he had in the majors last year. He made 9 starts in the big leagues, and his skill interactive ERA was 4.93. He had a low strikeout rate, and he let up enough hard contact and fly balls for us to feel good about stacking against him. Henry does get a cushy matchup here because the Royals have been hideous against everyone to open this year. Their WRC plus is 61. That is abysmal. The hope is that they can get things going tonight in good weather, in a good matchup, and hopefully a great park for hitting. So it's not fun to stack a team that's been the worst in baseball so far this year, but maybe the good matchup can ignite them. And maybe facing a lefty will be good too, because they get the platoon advantage for Bobby Witt, Salvador Perez, Edward Olivares. MJ Melendez actually has a higher ISO in his career against lefties and righties. I don't expect that to continue, but it tells me that he's not overmatched against lefties, which is a good thing for sure against a young lefty to see that. And he's crushing the ball so far this year, despite bad results. Their active roster, the Royals, since the start of last year, has a 97 WRC plus against lefties versus 82 against righties. So the hope here is that facing a lefty can help put them in a better spot than what they've been in so far this year. So I would say Witt, Perez, Olivares are all guys on the upside. And then Melendez you can use despite not having the platoon advantage here and feel good about that. So hopefully that allows us to stack the Royals without using low upside guys. Not sure if it will, but I think that's the way I want to play things for tonight, given the stacking options we have available. The weather for tonight for the Twins is bad, and that does hurt things quite a bit. So this will also feel like stacking a low upside offense similar to the Royals, just for a very different reason. But I think that we may want to stack them despite the low temperatures, despite the super low implied total. I think they're still in play for today. They're facing Johnny Brito, who they just saw 2 starts ago, and the Twins hit him really hard. He lasted just 2/3 an inning, let up 7 runs, no strikeouts, and 1 walk. The Twins put 8 balls in play in that game. 6 of those were hard hits, and 2 of them were barreled. Brito also let up 2 barrels the start after that against the Angels. So it doesn't seem like this was an issue for Brito in the minors because he had a 3.31 ERA in AAA last year despite a low strikeout rate. And you don't typically have that good of an ERA with a low strikeout rate if you're not suppressing hard contact. But it's not ideal. The team, the Twins, just on last week or 2 weeks ago, they hit him hard. Now they get to see him again, and they're healthier now than they were at that time. So the Twins, to me, a quality stack here, despite the bad weather in Minneapolis for tonight. It kind of seems like Max Kepler might be getting back to lifting the ball, which he did not do last year. He had a 34% fly ball rate last year. It's 47% in a small sample this year. His ISO is 225, potentially as a direct result of that. The eye at the plate for Kepler doesn't seem perfect yet, or maybe it's a changed approach to try to generate more power. I'm not sure, but, I think that looking at Kepler last year, you needed to see him put the ball in the air more often to get out of last year's funk. And he's doing that so far. So I do like Kepler. The salary on Kepler very reasonable here at $2,500. I can get behind that. Jorge Polanco didn't have a good rehab stint, but did hit a home run yesterday. Has looked good so far in the majors. So he's 26. I think that makes a lot of sense. I can get behind that. And maybe if Alex Kirilloff were to be activated, he's $2,200. I think he had a home run, or he did something in AAA on a rehab stint yesterday. So if Kirilloff gets added too, then the Twins could be very healthy in a good spot. But a really good value option if you want to get to Strider while using maybe Mike Trout within your Angels stacks as well. So the Royals, tough option because they're bad. The Twins, a tough option because they're in bad weather, but I still think both those teams deserve our attention for tonight. Let's go now to things to watch and expand on Lance Lynn very quickly. He's had horrible results so far this year, so maybe odd to hear me saying I'm open to him despite being on the road and facing Toronto, but he's had good strikeout numbers, and those stabilize more quickly than the batted ball data, which has been pretty rough for Lynn so far. 28% strikeout rate for Lance Lynn across 4 starts. And I think that means he has a path to a nice game for DFS. You don't find that very often for $7,800, so he's worthy of a look here. I do prefer Alex Cobb, but Lance Lynn, no length concerns there, just more about the matchup and being on the road and the hard contact than anything else. I definitely gave consideration to stacking Arizona instead of the Twins in the third slot there, in large part because of the weather. Arizona facing Brad Keller, and he's the part of the reason why I push them down is because Keller is letting up just a 22% fly ball rate with his new repertoire that he has this year. But he is walking a lot of guys, not a ton of strikeouts, so there is some window to get to him here. I would say Arizona just a smidge below the Twins for tonight. I'm very open to Detroit for one-offs. This is another thing within the bad offense theme for tonight. It's mostly just I want to use Kerry Carpenter, though. They're facing Colin Ray, who has struggled with fly balls and hard contact across 2 starts, and the Tigers don't have a lot of guys who can supply that to give Ray issues, but Kerry Carpenter is one. He has a 20% barrel rate this year. It was 11% last year, so that's not a huge fluke. His salary is $2,700. I adore him. I think that if you find other guys in this Tigers lineup you like, cool, good for you. I don't. I think for me, it's primarily just Carpenter, but he's got upside. He can hit the ball deep. He can hit some dingers, barrels it up. Good matchup. Should have the roof closed in Milwaukee for tonight. So Kerry Carpenter, a good one-off at $2,700. Carpenter will be in our dinger calls too, so let's finish things out there. He'll be the fun one. I could have gone Melendez. Kind of fun because of the lefty on lefty thing. You don't see a lot of lefties with lefties well. Melendez seems like he may be one, so considered him. I do like his home run odds at FanDuel Sportsbook for tonight at 6-1. But we'll go Kerry Carpenter. He's also plus 630 over at FanDuel Sportsbook. So Carpenter is a fun one for today. The boring one, it's Mike Trout. Mike Trout against lefty, who's struggled so far this year. I don't get to talk Mike Trout super often, but I think with the presence of the Twins and their low salary guys, with guys like the Royals being in play with low salaries, we can probably get to Mike Trout tonight, and I kind of want to do so. So dinger calls for Monday, Mike Trout and Kerry Carpenter, but Kerry Carpenter is basically Mike Trout anyway, so they're effectively the exact same thing. That is all that we have here for today on the Solo Shot. Back with you once again tomorrow to break down Tuesday's slate. Should be a juicy one there. And also, we'll have the PGA podcast back with Brandon Gadula. Make sure you're subscribed to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed to get that podcast right as it is posted. And make sure you check us out on the FanDuel YouTube page too. Subscribe there. Hit the thumbs up button if you like what you hear, or give us a 5-star rating over on Apple Podcasts. If you have any questions for me, I am on Twitter at Jim Sannes, JimSannes. You can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcasts. Want to thank you all for tuning in for today. Good luck to you with your MLB DFS lineups for tonight. We'll talk to you once again tomorrow to break down Tuesday's slate. This has been the Solo Shot right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network.